Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sabir, pronouns he, him, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Kristin van Ogtrop's newest book, Did I Say That Out Loud? Midlife Indignities and How to Survive Them, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass over on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, authors like Kristin and Susan, we wouldn't be here today, and we are so appreciative of all of you. So, tonight we are thrilled to have with us Kristin van Ogtrop for the launch of her newest book, Did I Say That Out Loud? Kristin is the author of Just Let Me Lie Down, Necessary Terms for the Half-Insane Working Mom, the former longtime editor-in-chief of Real Simple and the amateur columnist for Time. She's a literary agent at Inkwell Management. Her writing has appeared in countless publications and the New York Times best-selling collection, The Bitch in the House. She is a wife and mother of 3, but sometimes loves her dogs more than anybody else. Joining Kristin in conversation is Susan Orlean. Susan is the author of 8 books, including The Bullfighter Checks Her Makeup, My Kind of Place, Saturday Night, and Lazy Little Loafers. In 1999, she published The Orchid Thief, a narrative about orchid poachers in Florida, which was made into the Academy Award-winning film adaptation, starring Nicolas Cage and Meryl Streep. Her book, Rin Tin Tin, The Life and the Legend, a New York Times notable book, won the Ohio Anna Book Award and the Richard Wall Memorial Award. In 2018, she published the library book about the arson fire at the Los Angeles Public Library and won the California Book Award, the Marfield Prize, the USC Library Scripters Nonfiction Award, and the Maxine Cushing Gray Award. It was also longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal and was a New York Times notable book of 2018. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Susan and Kristin to the stage.
Especially to Kristin. And thank you to the Strand for hosting this event. This is, of course, a great pleasure. Sorry we can't do this in person, but this is a reasonable alternative. Before we begin, Kristin and I have to confess to having a very, very, very ancient history together. Let's see, we overlapped at Vogue in 1987.
No. Well, you were there, I think, when I got there. I got to Vogue in 1980. I got to Vogue in 1991. So you were like a pro by the time I got there, I guess.
Right. Oh, that's right. Okay. It was 91. I'm confusing my milestones, but that was a very formative moment for me, and obviously for you. And so, before we begin talking about this book, and you do address this very eloquently in the book, sort of telling the story of your career, but I think it would be wonderful if you would just recap a little bit of your professional life to kind of give people a sense of this range that you've had and how you came to be here tonight.
Okay. So I kind of bumbled my way through a love of reading and writing until I was in my mid-20s. I went to graduate school, got a master's degree in English. That was sort of a bad idea. And then I ended up working at Vogue. And, as I describe in the book, it's like I was walking down Madison Avenue and I fell in a manhole and I ended up in Anna Wintour's office. Susan, and I met a lot of the instant I got there. I met people who I felt like, oh, these are my people. You know, like not fashion people. I mean, you and I have talked about fashion, not necessarily fashion people, but magazine people. And, you know, I was surrounded by just intellectually curious, wonderful people. And so then I worked in magazines for a long time, for 25 years, working at a couple of different places, including Vogue twice, actually. And then ended up at Real Simple, where I was the editor-in-chief for 13 years. And it was great. It was a great, you know, as I think many people here tonight feel the same way. Like, it's when you find a job where the skills you possess, either because you've developed them or they're innate, and what the job requires, when they're the same, it's like magic, you know? And so that was great for a long time. And then the magazine industry really changed, in part because, you know, kids like our kids, yours and mine, read everything on their phones. And big consumer magazines that are very heavily ad supported, like the ones I worked for, became really tough. You know, my job at that point became a lot about managing decline, which was really felt very soul crushing. Yeah, you know, I do write about this in the book, and there are people who work in other industries aside from magazine publishing who, you know, I was on the panel recently, and someone commented about the oil and gas industry, which I guess if you work in oil and gas or magazines, there are a lot of similarities. Right. But then I left my magazine job and I took some time off. And in that time, my agent, Richard Pine, who, as Susan knows abundantly, and others here also know, is Susan's agent, offered a really interesting suggestion, which was the idea that you know, my skills as a magazine editor could translate to this, the world of book publishing and agenting specifically. And he somehow convinced the two other partners at Inkwell Management to agree with him. And so here I am. And so in my mid-50s, I started something really new. And I mean, I write about that in the book too, which was scary, but, you know, and humbling, I think, in a really good way.
It is interesting because you address a lot of what is depleting about being middle-aged, that you did this very significant turn in your life that was kind of enriching and invigorating. And it's a kind of wonderful contrast to, as you say, the indignities of middle age that have their own tragedy associated with them. I could relate very, very powerfully to a lot of the feeling of your body falling apart, things falling apart. I mean, that was actually the scariest chapter for me, because that sense of, oh no, you know, I mean, I had woken up the morning I was reading that chapter, I had gone for a hike the day before, feeling very vigorous, and the next day I woke up and I thought, oh God, everything hurts.
Yeah. Well, you reach an age, right? As you know, I quote my mom in the book saying that, like, she loves the moment when she's lying in bed first thing in the morning and she hasn't moved and nothing hurts. And then the minute you start to move, it's like, oh, there's a little thing there and there's a little thing there. And, but I think you have, look, you know, I mean, I hope that there are certainly things about middle age that are horrendous and super irritating, but, you know, what I want people to do is read the book and in a lot of ways just to laugh at those things, because what are you going to do? You know, I mean, you can let them sink you further and further down, or you can decide, I'm lucky I wake up every day. Right. And let's turn this into something funny if we can.
Something I really would love to talk about is the challenge of writing this kind of essay. And, you know, it is, I think, a form that people when it's done well, it should feel like you just wrote it on the back of an envelope when you were at a red light. In fact, it's extremely challenging, mostly because it's a tonal exercise. Very much, these rise and fall very much, I think, on being able to find a tone and convey it. So talk to me a little bit about, I mean, you had been doing the editor's note in Real Simple for a long time. That to me was probably was a sort of warm up for this kind of essay. But I'd love to talk about your process in writing, finding a tone, how you go about writing these, and the sort of writerly craft part of the book.
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, you know, you are an incredibly accomplished writer, Susan, and you have a lot of writer friends. And I think for all writers, the way you get to the finish line is different, right? And so for me, for writing essays, you're absolutely right. Writing that editor's letter every single month in Real Simple for 13 years was really good. And then writing the column for Time for a few years was really good training, because I had to figure out a way to communicate an idea in a way that was entertaining and made people want to keep reading. I mean, that's what all writers, you basically just want people to keep reading. And so what I found for me, both in this book and then, you know, in the other things that I had written previously that kind of trained me for a book like this, were if I need to find a specific conversation or story as kind of the hook. That to me is like the germ. To me, what the hardest thing in writing anything is if you're writing about an idea that doesn't have anything to ground it, really. And so in the process of writing this book, working with my editor, Tracy Behart, Little Brown, who's like dream human on the planet, sometimes I would write something that was a story that I just wanted to write because it's sort of how I make sense of life sometimes. And then I would later realize, oh, this is what that's about. Mm-hmm. You know, so the intent or the meaning sometimes came later after the story itself. You know, there's an essay in the book. I mean, you're obviously a huge dog person. There's an essay in the book about the loss of a puppy. And I wrote that essay really just about the process of this dog. And you know, I know I said my book is funny, but this actually is not super funny, this essay. But the process of the disappearance of this dog and how we learned what ended up happening to him. And, but I realized after I wrote it, it's really about community. That essay is really an essay about community and people coming together to help each other, even if they're strangers. And so then in the editing process, I dialed that up because I realized that's what this really wants to be about. Not about, this dog is sort of the micro thing that explains this macro that even people who haven't lost a dog can understand and feel.
Right. The construction of the book were you working on with the theme in mind and creating essays to service that theme as opposed to them being individual pieces that you gathered later?
Yeah. I mean, they all really speak to, I mean, the commonality is they speak to just sort of the ridiculous and sometimes really moving things that happen to you basically when you're over the age of 40. And whether that's about career stuff or relationships or friendships or your body falling apart or technology, you know, it all falls under that umbrella. So that was with each one. I mean, even for instance, the dog essay I started writing a couple of years ago, before I was writing this book. And, you know, but the reason it works in the book is because there's so much in there about having the way my children reacted with the dog disappearance, the way I felt as a woman in the middle part of my life about community and grace, and unexpected, you know, beautiful things that happen in a tragedy. And I think that when you're younger, younger Kristin wouldn't have seen those same things as I did when I became less young, shall we say.
Are there essay writers who you look to as models or inspirations?
Oh gosh.
And I mean, that's not a trick question, because I don't think that it means, I think there are a lot of people who write in a genre that they don't necessarily read that much. So that is not a trick question.
I mean, there are people who are, you know, known as essay writers, like Sloane Crosley, very successful, best-selling essay writer who is hilarious. You know, she's someone whose work I really admire because she seems so effortlessly funny. You know, people like Sloane Crosley or Samantha Irby, but then there are, and obviously Nora Ephron, who's just, you know, the gold standard. But then there are people like, you know, novelists like Anne Patchett, who, when she opens up her laptop and writes an essay, they're always incredible. And even though her audience is mostly a fiction audience, she's a beautiful essayist. So, you know, I think there are great essays everywhere you look. You just have to look.
I wonder why, as a form, people are so skeptical of it. And I think that it's the phenomenon of the problem of it seeming easy. Which, as I said, I think it's absolutely the opposite. I think this kind of writing is sometimes the most challenging. But I think there are personal essays, and particularly personal essays by women, have come with some baggage. I think there's a feeling of that they're sort of navel gazing and trivial, and I think that's so wrong and so short-sighted, and something that it's funny because there's a long history of really good domestic essays. If I'm making up that term, by the way, it's a real term, but I want to take a little break for you to read a short section, because while we're on the topic of tone, I think it would be really wonderful for people to catch a little snippet of the book and have a sense of what your voice is as a writer.
So this is just a little bit from the introduction. And I'm jumping into a point where I've been talking about how everyone around me had become mindful, and I was deeply skeptical of mindfulness. So, and I just have done something to my screen. Hold on. Right. So can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I can see you.
Okay. Then I'm just going to go with it. My screen suddenly looks completely different, but you're teeny now, but I can still see you.
I'm teeny now, but that's okay. I'm happy. I'm okay being teeny.
Which is why I found myself not long ago in a mindfulness meditation class on an otherwise ordinary Sunday afternoon. I was sitting cross-legged on an orange bolster on the floor of the local yoga studio, trying to accept with an open heart and discerning mind the fact that both of my feet were beginning to fall asleep, and wondering whether mindfulness was a bunch of hooey, just as I suspected, when I heard the instructor say, there is a big difference between thinking and thoughts. Immediately I knew that the $25 I had plunked in the basket outside the studio was completely worth it, because even if I never achieved mindfulness, that one simple phrase uncovered an essential truth that has eluded me for some time. I used to think, and now I have thoughts. Oh, there is a difference. Thinking is linear, with one idea leading to another like identical cars of a long train, sleek and shiny, all linked and moving forward with precision to a preset destination. Maybe you are thinking about what you need from the grocery store, or whether your dog has to go to the vet, or how you organize your closet so each item inside doesn't look like something you never want to wear again. Whatever the case, you are progressing in an orderly fashion with the hope, in fact, the reasonable expectation, that when you reach your destination, it will be pleasing and well worth the trip. Once you pass the age of 45, however, the mysterious process happening inside your head is no longer linear. Now you are on a different train, a rickety circus train that looks held together with paper clips. There's an elephant in one car and a lion in the next, and then one with a giraffe whose head sticks out of the top, and after that, a car with a bunch of drunk clowns. You don't know where you're going, and really, does it matter? Because your circus train is probably about to crash. That is the difference between thinking and thoughts.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. Tell me about the challenge of writing about your family.
How long is that?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I find so interesting as somebody who generally writes about people I don't know.
Yeah.
And I don't have an emotional stake in the same way that I would if it were my family, like writing about your kids, writing about your husband.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes back. So I'm going to, in answering this, I'm going to go back to what you were saying about essays a minute ago. I think that if essays by women, if domestic essays, so-called, by women get a bad rap, like, I don't care because I feel like that's the stuff I like to read. I feel like it helps you feel like you are part of a community, and you get a peek inside someone's life that is just similar enough to yours that you are entertained, but you feel seen, kind of. And so in writing about my family, it's related. I mean, probably many of the people who read my book will have personal circumstances that are at least somewhat similar to mine. My family has, at this point, gotten sort of used to being characters. I have 3 boys and a husband, and 2 dogs who don't seem to have an opinion about appearing in the book. But when for years in my editor's letter, Real Simple, my kids would appear from time to time, and my husband from time to time, and they just don't. This is one answer to your question. They don't care, first of all. My husband is a much more sensitive person than I am. I am boorish compared to him. And so he was sort of like my family sensitivity reader. and there were a couple of places in the book he's like, you might want to take this part out. But my kids are very open. They're very, and there's nothing I say in the book, I don't think, that reflects really badly on them. I mean, when I'm writing about my kids and me, I'm usually the idiot in the story.
Right.
I think the short answer to your question is my family's used to it. I think my family is very similar to a lot of families in this world. And I think that is mostly wonderful.
I think one, as you point out, one of the things that's so appealing and humanizing is that you are incredibly self-effacing. I mean, you don't tend to valorize yourself, to say the least, which is what a lot of where it becomes very relatable, that I think we're all pretty hard on ourselves privately, and you express a lot of things. I mean, certainly the marveling at the way your body betrays you as you're older is something that, I mean, I don't know, maybe there are middle-aged women who look in the mirror and say, God, I look amazing. I don't know. I'm not sure I want to meet them.
Right, actually. You don't want to be friends with those people.
Right? I mean, they don't have to look at themselves and say, I hate myself. But I think that very often you look in the mirror and think, oof, God, I really, that's a new lump and that's a new sag. And I think expressing that, and this is where it is a process of feeling seen, you're saying a lot of the things that we're thinking more privately, and feeling like you're the only person in the world who has that saggy stomach, or feels like you've been a terrible parent, or all of the other self-doubt that you discuss.
But don't you think, can I just say one thing to you, Susan?
Yeah.
Don't you think that, so when I met you, I was in my 20s, and to me, the 20s were the worst decade. I hated being in my 20s. There was so much uncertainty. I didn't know how my adult life was going to turn out. I had so much self-doubt. And now, and I don't know if you share this, I hope you do, because I think a lot of women our age do. When I look at some of those uncertainties, or I look in the mirror, or I look at some of the mistakes I've made as a parent or a wife or a human being, and unless they're really terrible and they need to be either apologized for or changed, I just think, oh, well, I think that the women I know who are our age are so much more self-accepting than we were when we were in our 20s and 30s, and that's such a good feeling. I think it's a great feeling.
Yeah, and I do think that that's a lot of what you capture, which is the ability to sort of laugh at yourself and say, I screwed this up, but it's all right. It's okay. And when you're 25, everything is so dire, and it feels like your whole life is in the balance all the time. And it's a hard time. I'm not 100% sure I would want to go back to that.
No.
I mean, I could see going back 10 years. I'm not sure I'd want to go back to my 20s with a lot of the anxiety of feeling like you don't yet know where you're going to land as an adult.
Yeah.
I want to encourage people to ask questions. There is the little ask a question thingamajig on the screen, and we will get to questions shortly. So please fire away.
Thingamajig is the best word, isn't it? Thingamajig is in the top 5 words, I think.
Yeah, and it doesn't get used often enough.
No.
So now that you are straddling these two worlds of agent and writer, how does that sort itself out?
Oh gosh. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I mean, I think that being a writer makes me a better agent, but it also makes me, in that I've been on the other side. But being an agent makes me see how hard publishing can be sometimes. So it's sort of it's a mixed blessing, I would say. It's mostly a blessing, And it also, being an agent also makes me feel so incredibly fortunate to be able to publish a book, because there's so many people everywhere you look. You go, walk outside and throw a rock and you're going to hit somebody who's writing a book,
Right.
and to get that book into the hands of an audience is a long, really tough process sometimes. And I think I didn't realize that so well, and I took it more for granted before I became an agent.
Mm-hmm. We certainly lived in a golden age of magazines. I'm not turning to you necessarily to say, give us the Wall Street analysis of what is happening in the magazine world, but you had a very intimate view of it. What's your sense where we're heading?
I don't know. I think when I was in my last few years at Time Inc., which is the company that no longer exists, which is so sad. I mean, Time Inc., did you ever work for Time Inc.? I don't think so, right? Did you? When I was like a kid in magazines, I thought Time Inc. was like the place you go and you work there. Because it's populated with grown-ups and anyway, whatever. So in the end of my time there was someone who was looking, some kind of prognosticator who said, well, it's not that magazines will ever die, it's just that there will be fewer. It's sort of like a separating the wheat from the chaff kind of situation. I mean, Dick Parsons was the CEO of Time Warner for a while when I was at Time Inc. And he said, as long as magazines will exist, as long as there are the 3 Bs, bathroom, bedroom, and beach. And we quoted that. We quoted him so many times, but I don't know. People take their phones into the bathroom. They take their phones to the beach, and they take their phones into bed with them, even though it's so unhealthy. And I do it practically every single day. So I don't know if Dick Parsons was right about that. So I think that, there's some magazines like The New Yorker, for instance. I don't think The New Yorker will ever stop publishing in print because it's a particular kind of reading experience. I think a magazine like Real Simple is a particular kind of reading experience because the paper is matte and it feels tranquil. But I think there are other magazines, particularly the ones where the content is so easily accessed digitally, and the reading experience doesn't matter as much. I think those are the ones that I think might have a tough road in the next 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah, it's I feel so grateful that I became a magazine writer because magazines existed. If they didn't exist, I suppose I would become something else. But given that it felt like exactly what I wanted to do, I feel really grateful that that was the time in American history when magazines were really thriving. And who knows, I have no prediction either. And I think the pandemic, through all of the predictions that had already been made, were changed even further by COVID. So it'll be very interesting to see where we are a year from now in the magazine world. I kind of sort of shuddered. I actually somebody was just telling me the number of visitors to the New Yorker website as opposed to subscribers to the magazine. And when I remember when the New Yorker began their website, and it was the stepchild by, it was this little thing kind of moldering in the corner. And I don't think anybody could have imagined that it would explode the way it has.
Yeah. But I mean, people have talked for years about the book industry, and print book sales are up by like 30% in the first quarter of 2021. I mean, certainly influenced by the pandemic, but I don't know. I think that I could be totally wrong about magazines. What hurt, and this is, you know this, and you don't need to be a genius to know it. I mean, what hurt magazines for the most part was the advertising model
Right.
collapsed, and so who knows? Maybe that will right itself at some point, and it won't. It will be like the decline of the book industry that people were forecasting for so long that never happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And knock on wood, I think we all feel very lucky and happy and somewhat vindicated that the book industry has continued to thrive, given that its demise is predicted pretty much every year and over and over again. Let's take a couple questions. I see them popping up here. And please continue posting them because we'll have time to get to a number of them. What was your experience of aging in the context of a workplace in which the newer employees were ever younger than you were? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. And I felt it, man. It was, what was my experience? Can I just say bad? No. I mean, it was interesting. I mean, the one thing that was great about leading an editorial team where the people were younger than I was I felt really current. Even though I couldn't wear the clothes that were fashionable, some of them and stuff, and even though I never mastered Snapchat, which was at the time was new when I was kind of leaving the magazine industry, I felt like I always knew the things that were happening in our culture. Without having to, obsessively read the newspaper and talk to many people, because it was happening kind of all around me. But when you work with, by the time I left my magazine job, I was I think maybe the oldest person on a staff of, I don't know, close to 50. And I guess it was helped by the fact that I was the boss of those people. But even so, I did feel, there was a time when like high heels, like I look at Nancy Pelosi wearing those heels and I think, how does that woman do that? I got to the point where high heels were sort of hurting my back, and my heavy bag that I had to carry to work was hurting my back. And so I definitely felt it. But I also felt when I was given the chance or asked to play this role, I did feel a little sort of mother henish in a good way. Mm-hmm. I think I was able to tell the people who were like the 20-something-year-old me, don't worry, it's all going to work out. You're doing a great job. Keep going. It's going to work out.
Did you feel ever that there was pressure for you to give way to a younger person?
No. Maybe it was there, but I either ignored it or it wasn't there because no, I didn't feel that.
Yeah. Next question. I understand that Kristin was a champion high jumper in high school. Is she still doing it? If not, why not?
Kristin was a mediocre high jumper in the tiny state of Delaware, which didn't have many high jumpers. But it is true. This question has either come from a member of my family or maybe Richard Pine, who knows this about me. I would place third in the state of Delaware in high jump when I was in high school. And it's been downhill ever since. Yeah.
So you're not practicing?
I'm not practicing, although in the pandemic, we have so many random gamey, athletic-y things out in our yard. I probably could put a high jump out there too.
Yeah, think about it. Consider it.
Susan, you could put a high jump behind you on that patio.
Actually, yeah, I could, but I'm starting at a disadvantage because I'm short. But
I don't think that matters in high jump.
Oh, really? Well,
I'm not so sure.
I'm inspired. Living through middle age, are there still some things you wish to do? Is there a bucket list?
Oh, I don't have a bucket list. I basically make my choices based on, am I going to regret it if I don't do this thing? But I don't really have a bucket list, because if you have a bucket list, when does it end? If I had a bucket list, it would have about 7,000 things on it. So no. Susan, do you have a bucket list?
No. I mean, the only version of a bucket list I have is there's certain places that I would very much like to visit. I think that's very common. It's just a wish list of places I haven't been that I want to go, but I don't want to do anything. I'm done doing.
I find that impossible to believe. P.S.
No, I mean, I'm done. I'm just hanging on by a thread. Let me go to a few more. Asking Kristin to put on both her agent and author hat. I read both fiction and nonfiction, especially love memoir and personal essays. If a good story is a good story, why is it so much more difficult for a relatively unknown author to get a memoir published than a novel? Interesting.
Oh, such a good question. I actually don't. Whoever you are who asked that question, I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know why that's harder. Because to me, a good memoir, I mean, I'm not saying it's not true. It is true. But I don't know why it's true.
I would take a wager at this, actually. I think a relatively unknown author can create an imagined fictional world that you can become very invested in, and it can be brilliant and stand on its own. A memoir presumes that you have some interest in the person, and I think it's hard with a relatively unknown author to make the argument that their memoir merits being read. I'm not saying that it does or doesn't merit being read, but I think a publisher goes into it, my guess is, with the fear that readers will say, I don't know who this person is. Why would I want to know about their life?
Yeah.
I think you read fiction for the story, not for the author, until the author becomes very famous, and then you might read a book of theirs for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, look, as an agent, I get a lot of memoir submissions, and there aren't that many that sort of rise above, that are beautifully written and also really interesting. In fiction, as you're saying, Susan, you can make stuff up, right? In a memoir, I mean, which is not to say you can't be an unknown author and get a memoir published. I mean, the best recent example of that within the last, 5 years is Educated. Tara Westover wasn't a name when she got, but she wrote a really interesting, well-written book with a crazy story. I mean, crazy. That's a technical term, crazy. But there aren't many Tara Westovers out there.
Right. Yeah, I think that, and interestingly, my guess is if that had been fiction, it would have been less successful.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
I mean, I'm not an agent, obviously. I don't know, but this is my guess. Eric asks, how long did it take to write your story? I assume book.
It took me, I started writing it, I would say, at the beginning of 2017. And I finished at the beginning of 2020. So a few years, but not not full time, in fits and starts in part. So.
And let me follow up on that and just ask, did you complete each section before you went on to the next, or were you working simultaneously on a lot of different parts of the book?
I would do one chapter at a time. Yeah, I can't do
them in the order in which they appear in the book.
No, we sort of like put the puzzle pieces together at the end, trying to balance short pieces and long pieces. And there are a couple of essays in the book. One about the death of a friend who died young. One about the dog. The one about aging parents is it's not it's not really sad, but it's not laugh out loud funny. So those we wanted to sort of space those out. And so we tried to sort of balance, by we, I mean me and Tracy and I, my editor, balance out the kind of more serious topics or serious takes on topics with things that were just lighter and funnier. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Susan, I mean, being a very different sort of writer from you'd take on these huge projects, and this is a little, this is kind of a series of things. I can't work on more than one at a time. Mm-hmm. I think my brain just doesn't.
Yeah. I can't either. I just, and I like to think of that as a good sign that you're really absorbed in one narrative and then you move on to the next. But yeah. There are certainly people who are able to dip into different parts of their book, and they're probably faster than I am.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. This is a comment, which is not a question, but thank you for the essay about Rebel. It helped me deal with a similar experience. It did what all great nonfiction does. It made me feel like I'm not alone.
Very nice. So yeah. For those who have not picked up the book, the essay about Rebel. Rebel's the puppy who disappeared in the Adirondacks one winter day. And it took us a few months to figure out what happened to Rebel. But it's a common, I mean, everyone loses, and Susan, this has happened to you. Everybody loses a pet eventually. And this pet we just happened to lose earlier than predicted and planned. But it's a unique kind of sadness when you lose a pet.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. During the time you wrote your book, did things change in your life and compel you to go back and rewrite pieces or delete or replace some of the pieces?
Okay, so things changed in my life 180 degrees during the writing of the book. But I don't think, it made me add. So for instance, one of the last chapters of the book is advice for a person in a midlife career crisis. And so there's an earlier essay in the book about, reaching a certain stage of my life and my career where, as Susan and I were talking about at the beginning, where my magazine career was kind of disappearing or devolving. And then I had this period when I was between jobs for a couple of years. And so this essay in the latter part of the book follows the journey of a person, i.e. this person, as she tries kind of different things to figure out, was there, and I think a lot of people in midlife experience this, is there something else that I actually should have been doing for the last 20 years other than the thing I was doing? Like, is there one true destiny for me that I just haven't found yet? And so in answer to your question, my life circumstances continued to change, and I wrote about that. And I wouldn't have been able to write that essay if I hadn't changed my life.
One question here is, where would you like the publishing industry as a whole to head? Do you feel there may be any antiquated norms in the industry?
Oh gosh. I'm not sure there is a way that I can answer that question without getting myself in big trouble. I think the publishing industry is filled with broad-minded, well-intentioned people who are changing as our culture changes. I think that I think publishing is evolving in a way that is healthy and will continue to. And I don't feel like I've been in publishing long enough. I mean, I've only been doing this for 2 years, on the agenting side, that is, to feel like I can answer that question with real authority.
That makes sense. Tell us about how you came up with the title. I find myself asking that question often.
I was riding with my son to the doctor yesterday, and I said, "Oh, that's the office where my endodontist is." And he said, "Yeah, you said that." And I said, "Oh, well, she's in that building over there." And he said, "Yeah, you said that." And so I don't, and Susan, you'd have to be superhuman if this doesn't happen to you too. You know, there's this weird thing that begins to happen to you where you think, did I think it or did I say it? Have I said it already? That's my next book. Did I say that already?
Right. That's the companion volume.
I mean, there was another title we were really playing with, which was "I'm Not Tired, It's Just My Face." But that just seemed to, because there are so many things in the book that aren't about the physical self, it seemed too narrow. But that was probably the runner-up. So I think, did I say that out loud, is something that a lot of people this age think to themselves many times during the day.
It's funny because I interpreted it also as, you know, there is a point, I think, as you get older where you just say whatever you feel like, and you may have a moment of then thinking, oh my God, did I actually just say that?
Yeah.
Things that, I mean, I think you just feel much more uninhibited because you're more confident about who you are and what you are. So you're not it's not as much I'm losing my mind and I can't remember if I said it, as much as, well, I guess I'm at that stage in my life where I say what I think. And
right, it just comes out.
Yeah.
It comes out, and then the listener just has to deal with it.
Right. We are just about out of time. I want to make sure that I got all of these questions, which were really good questions. This one, I'm afraid, would take hours to answer. What is your writing process like? Has it changed over time? So if you can answer that briefly, then we'll be.
I actually can answer that really briefly. I write best in the morning when no one else is awake, because other people awake just change the chemistry of the entire house. I write on my computer, then I print it out, then I edit it by hand, and then I input the changes into the computer, and then I give it to Tracy Behar. That's my process.
And has that been the way you've written?
Yeah, mostly.
Since time began.
Since time began, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
I have a friend who, there's that scene in Little Women where she puts on, in the most recent Little Women movie adaptation, where Saoirse Ronan puts on that jacket every time she starts to, right. And then a friend of mine who I think, Kate, who I think is probably on this in the audience, said, do you put on a thing? And I said, no, I don't put on a thing.
Some people do. I had a boyfriend.
You put on a thing?
No, I don't. No, but I had a boyfriend who had to wear a button-down shirt and tie and to write. And this was back when nobody was wearing a tie. I mean, this was in 1980, and and he was 20, and it was completely weird. But I had a friend who had a hunting shirt that belonged to her grandfather, and she had to wear it. It was very much a fetish kind of I mean, in her mind, she couldn't write without wearing that. And no, I don't have any interesting, odd needs and conditions for my writing.
Yeah, and clearly you don't need them.
Well, I feel glad too that I kind of, what happens when you have to put that shirt in the laundry and you can't write because your special writing shirt is being washed. I mean, I'm that would be very dangerous for deadlines.
Yeah.
I think that we are out of time, and I'm sorry this kind of flew by. I want to thank the Strand again for supporting writers and books and being such a wonderful institution, and thank everyone in the audience for being here. And thank you, Kristin.
Oh my gosh, Susan, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to the Strand. This has been really great. And Susan, so good to spend this time with you.
Thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Susan, for such an amazing evening. It was definitely very insightful, very interesting. To our audience members, if you still haven't purchased a copy of Did I Say That Out Loud, there's a small link at the bottom of the screen which you could press, and then you can proceed to buy the book. Thank you, ladies, once again. I hope everyone had an amazing time. We definitely did over here, so have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.